The soft glow of golden lights shimmered on the walls as Patricia Langford sat in her armchair, staring at the twinkling Christmas tree that stood tall in her living room. It was December again, and as the wind howled outside, she felt a wave of nostalgia wash over her. Years ago, this same room was filled with laughter, chaos, and the sweet scent of cinnamon cookies. Her late husband, George, would play the piano while their children, Daniel and Rebecca, danced around the tree in their pajamas. Patricia could still remember Daniel's excited little voice shouting, "Mom, Santa's coming," while Rebecca carefully arranged the ornaments, making sure every color matched. Back then, the house wasn't as grand as it was now. It was a modest home above their small family bookstore downtown, but it was full of warmth, the kind of warmth money could never buy. After George passed away, Patricia had thrown herself into expanding the bookstore. She wanted to keep his dream alive, and through sheer will and sleepless nights, she built it into one of Portland's most beloved places. Customers loved her calm voice and her way of remembering every regular's favorite book her children had grown up between shelves of stories, surrounded by words and love. But now, as she looked around the large mansion she had moved into after selling the bookstore, it felt hollow. Every corner was spotless, every decoration perfect, but there was no laughter, no noise, no smell of cookies baking in the oven. Just silence and memories that echoed through the rooms. Patricia smiled faintly as she picked up an old ornament shaped like a tiny book. It was Daniel's first Christmas craft from kindergarten. The paint had faded, but the love behind it never would. "You were such a sweet boy," she whispered, running her finger over his name written in shaky handwriting. That ornament used to hang right in the middle of the tree every year, no matter how grown up Daniel got. She took a deep breath, placing it on a branch once again, as if it would somehow bring back the old times. Outside, snowflakes began to fall softly, dusting the world in white. Patricia made herself a cup of hot cocoa, wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and sat by the fireplace. She thought about how fast everything had changed, how children who once couldn't fall asleep without their mother's lullaby now had lives too busy for her calls. Still, she waited every year, hoping this Christmas might bring them back home. She had faith, perhaps foolishly, that some things never changed, that love, once built so strong, couldn't possibly fade. But as the night grew quiet, a certain loneliness began to creep in. Patricia turned off the lights and sat silently in front of the glowing tree, whispering, "Maybe this year will be different." She didn't know that this Christmas would indeed be different, just not in the way she hoped. Morning light spilled through the lace curtains of Patricia's grand living room. She woke early, as she always did, wrapped in her wool robe and fuzzy slippers. The house was elegant, with high ceilings, marble floors, and tall windows that overlooked the city. Yet despite the beauty, it felt like a museum, quiet, polished, untouched. She spent most mornings reading by the fireplace, the sound of her teacup clinking against the saucer, the only reminder that someone still lived there. As Christmas approached, Patricia decorated her mansion with care. She strung lights across the staircase, hung stockings on the mantel, and placed scented candles in every room. Her favorite part was the tree in the main hall. Tall, graceful, covered in gold and red ornaments she'd collected over decades. Each decoration held a memory. There was the little angel Rebecca had made in preschool, the snowflake George had carved from wood, and the heart-shaped ornament from their 25th wedding anniversary. Every item was a piece of her life, a reminder of the people she loved most. But this year, as she stood back to admire her work, something felt off. There was beauty everywhere, but no joy. The echoes of laughter that once filled the home were gone. The warmth that once defined her Christmas mornings now existed only in her memories. Patricia walked slowly through the halls, her hand brushing along the furniture she'd once chosen with excitement. Now, all she wanted was company. Not grand gifts or expensive food, just the sound of her children's voices, the smell of pancakes on Christmas morning, and the simple comfort of family. She checked her phone. No messages. The last text from Daniel was 3 weeks old, reminding her to take it easy because of her back pain. Rebecca had sent a few photos from her office Christmas party, but hadn't mentioned visiting. Patricia smiled softly at the screen, pretending she didn't feel the sting. She had always told herself that her children were busy with their own lives, that it was natural for them to drift away. But deep down, she missed being needed. In the afternoon, Patricia baked 2 pies, just as she did every year. 1 apple, 1 pumpkin. The scent filled the kitchen, wrapping her in bittersweet comfort. As she wiped her flour-covered hands, she looked out the window. Snow continued to fall, and children played in the street below. Parents held hands, couples laughed, and a family of 4 carried a Christmas tree across the sidewalk. Patricia smiled, then sighed. "Maybe I'll invite them for pie someday," she murmured. By evening, she sat in front of the fireplace again, sipping tea and listening to an old record George had loved. The notes filled the empty spaces around her, echoing softly off the high ceilings. She didn't know that her phone would ring the next day, not with the warmth she longed for, but with words that would quietly break her heart. The next morning, as Patricia sat at her kitchen table reading the newspaper, her phone buzzed. Seeing Daniel's name flash on the screen brought an instant smile to her face. "Finally," she whispered, brushing her hair back and answering with a cheerful tone. "Good morning, sweetheart." There was a pause on the other end, followed by Daniel's calm but hesitant voice. "Hey, Mom, how are you?" Patricia could tell something was off. His voice lacked its usual warmth, and there was a stiffness to his words. "I'm doing well," she said softly. "Just finishing up the decorations. The house looks beautiful this year. I can't wait to have you both over for Christmas Eve dinner." Silence. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "About that, Mum. I wanted to talk to you about Christmas." Her heart skipped. "Oh? What about it?" she asked. He hesitated again. "Well, Laura and I decided to keep it small this year. Just the kids and her parents. You know, less stress, fewer people." The words hit like a cold wind. Patricia froze, her fingers tightening around the phone. She tried to steady her voice. "Oh, I see. So, you're spending Christmas at your house this year?" "Yeah," Daniel said quickly. "It's just easier. You know how chaotic things get with the kids and all." Patricia swallowed hard, forcing a light chuckle. "Of course, dear. I understand. You should enjoy it." Her voice trembled slightly, but she masked it with calmness. Daniel continued talking. Something about new decorations and how his wife's parents were helping with dinner, but Patricia barely heard a word. Her mind went blank. She'd imagined the whole family gathered at her long dining table, the fire crackling, the grandchildren laughing. Now it would be just her and the echo of silence. When the call ended, she kept the phone to her ear for a few seconds, as if maybe he'd change his mind and say, "Mum, I'm kidding. Of course you're coming." But the line was quiet. She set the phone down gently and stared at the table. The apple pie she'd baked yesterday sat untouched. Slowly, tears welled in her eyes. Patricia wiped them quickly, whispering to herself, "He's busy, that's all." But deep down, she knew it wasn't about busyness. It was about choice. She wasn't being forgotten by accident. She was being left out on purpose. She took a deep breath, stood up, and looked around the house filled with decorations meant for a family that would never arrive. The silence felt heavier now. As she turned off the kitchen light, she whispered to the empty room, "Merry Christmas, Daniel." Night fell early, and the mansion glowed softly under the reflection of the tree lights. Patricia sat in her favorite armchair by the window, the phone still on the table beside her. The world outside looked festive, houses twinkling, carolers singing in the distance. But inside, it was heartbreakingly quiet. The scent of apple pie lingered in the air, mixing with the faint smell of pine needles. She picked up an old photo album from the shelf and began flipping through it. There they were, Daniel and Rebecca, small and bright-eyed, sitting beside George in matching sweaters. George's arm was around her, his smile full of love and pride. Patricia traced her fingers over his face. "You'd know what to say," she whispered. "You'd know how to make this hurt less." Tears blurred her vision as she turned the pages. There was Daniel's graduation photo. She could still remember how she'd sold half the rare collection from her bookstore just to afford his tuition. She had worked late into the night back then, sleeping barely 3 hours a day, but she never complained. Her children were her purpose. Now, sitting in silence, she wondered if all that love had somehow faded from their hearts. The sound of the clock ticking filled the room. Patricia leaned back, letting her thoughts wander. "Maybe it's my fault," she murmured. "Maybe I call too much, ask too many questions." Her voice cracked, and she wiped her tears with the back of her sleeve. Or maybe I just got old, and they don't know what to do with me anymore. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her age. Her joints ached, her heart felt heavy, and even breathing seemed like effort. She looked at the empty couch across from her, remembering Daniel as a boy sitting there, unwrapping gifts, shouting with joy. That same boy had grown into a man who now saw her as a burden, or worse, as someone who didn't fit into his picture-perfect holidays. She closed the album and placed it gently on the table. "Enough crying, Patricia," she told herself, though her voice trembled. "You've faced harder things than this." She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself a cup of tea. The warmth soothed her hands, but not her heart. Looking out the window, she saw a young family building a snowman under the streetlight. The father lifted his little girl onto his shoulders, and the sound of her laughter echoed through the cold night. Patricia smiled faintly, tears sliding down again. "That used to be us," she whispered. Before heading to bed, she paused by the Christmas tree. She touched the ornament Daniel had made as a child and said softly, "You may not want me at your table, son, but you'll always have a place here." Her voice broke, but she smiled through it. She didn't know that this moment of silent heartbreak would soon ignite something powerful inside her, something that would change her Christmas forever. The next morning, Patricia woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing again. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but she managed to force a small smile when she saw the caller ID, Rebecca. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "Mom, your voice sounds tired," Rebecca replied, her tone filled with worry. "Did something happen?" Patricia hesitated, then sighed. "Daniel called yesterday," she said softly. "They're keeping Christmas small this year." There was silence, followed by Rebecca's sharp inhale. "He what?" she snapped. "He's excluding you from Christmas? Are you kidding me?" Patricia quickly tried to calm her. "Don't be upset, dear. He has a family of his own now. It's fine." "It's not fine, Mom," Rebecca insisted. "You raised us alone. You worked your whole life for us. You deserve better than to be treated like an afterthought." Patricia smiled faintly, touched by her daughter's fierce loyalty. "Rebecca, it's Christmas. Let's not turn it into bitterness," she said gently. "I'll be okay." But Rebecca wouldn't let it go. "I'm booking a flight. I'll be there by Christmas Eve. We'll spend it together." Patricia shook her head, though Rebecca couldn't see it. "No, darling. You stay with your husband. You have your own traditions now." "I don't care," Rebecca said, voice breaking. I won't let you spend Christmas alone. Patricia looked out the window, the morning sunlight reflecting on the snow. She felt warmth in her chest, not from the sun, but from her daughter's love. You're a good girl, she whispered. But don't worry about me. I have an idea. Rebecca paused. An idea? What kind of idea? Patricia smiled mysteriously. You'll see soon enough. After the call ended, she stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. Wrinkles lined her face, but her eyes still held determination. Something had changed overnight. The pain that had crushed her was still there, but it had transformed into resolve. She would not spend Christmas crying by the window again. She would create her own Christmas, one that no one could take away. She brewed herself another cup of tea and looked around her empty home with new eyes. If they won't come to me, she said quietly, I'll open my doors to those who will. And with that single thought, Patricia's heart began to heal. What started as rejection would soon turn into the most unforgettable Christmas of her life. Patricia sat quietly by the window that overlooked her snow-covered backyard, the sound of carolers faint in the distance. The smell of cinnamon from her half-baked pie filled the air, reminding her of a time when her life was far simpler, yet so much fuller. Her mind drifted to those hard years after her husband, Thomas, had passed away. She was only 42 then, with Daniel and Rebecca barely in their teens. The small bookstore they owned was struggling. Online sales were crushing local shops, and bills piled up faster than she could count. Still, every morning, she'd unlock the doors of Langford Pages with a smile and greet her customers as if everything was fine. At night, after closing, she'd pull out her old typewriter to type invoices, teach neighborhood kids to read, and then stay up late just to check on her children's homework. There were days when she'd secretly skip meals, so Daniel and Rebecca would never notice how tight money had become. She remembered one winter particularly well. The heating had broken down, and the entire house felt like an icebox. Daniel had offered to sell his bike to help fix it, but Patricia refused. She told him, "We may not have much, but we'll never sell memories to survive." She'd laugh through the pain, patch old coats, and tell her children bedtime stories so they'd fall asleep, dreaming rather than worrying. Those sacrifices had shaped her, made her strong and proud. She'd always believed that raising her kids with love would guarantee that love's return someday. But that belief now felt fragile, like a snowflake melting in her palm. But Patricia insisted gently, "You wouldn't be intruding. You'd be saving me from spending it alone." That simple honesty opened their hearts. She also reached out to local shelters and churches, offering to host a few families who had nowhere to go. The news spread quickly and Portland people were touched by her kindness and offered to help with cooking, decorating, and music. Patricia's mansion, once filled only with silence, now echoed with footsteps, laughter, and the sound of people working together. The more she planned, the more her loneliness faded. In the evenings, she'd sit by her fireplace, reading thank you messages on her phone from people excited to attend. Each message reminded her that love didn't always come from blood. Sometimes it bloomed from kindness. Maybe this is what I was meant to do, she thought. Maybe family isn't who you're born with, it's who shows up when you need them. The mansion slowly transformed into a winter wonderland. Patricia decorated each room with care, garlands wrapped around banisters, candles flickering by the windows, a giant Christmas tree in the center of her living room shimmering with silver and gold ornaments. The smell of vanilla cookies and roasted chestnuts filled the air. She ordered extra tables and chairs, borrowed plates from her neighbor, and arranged gifts for children in colorful wrapping paper. The local choir rehearsed carols in her garden, their voices blending with the crackling of the fireplace. Volunteers arrived to help. Teenagers from the community, single parents, and a few retirees who wanted to contribute something meaningful. Patricia felt alive again. Her hands were sore, Her back ached, but her heart was full. She'd wake before dawn to bake and work until midnight, tying ribbons and sorting donations. On one evening, a teenage girl named Holly, helping with decorations, asked softly, "Mrs. Langford, why are you doing all this for strangers?" Patricia smiled and replied, "Because once I had nothing but love to give, and that was always enough." That night, when she turned off the lights and looked around, the house no longer felt like a mansion. It felt like home again. When Patricia's handwritten invitation titled "A Christmas for Everyone Forgotten" went up on the town's bulletin board and Facebook page, she never expected what came next. Within hours, hundreds of comments flooded in, people sharing her post, tagging friends, and writing heartfelt notes. Some wrote, "I wish my mum was like you," while others said, "You reminded me what Christmas is really about." The local news station even reached out for an interview, touched by the idea of a widow turning her loneliness into community joy. Donations started pouring in. Cakes, toys, decorations, even a band that volunteered to play on Christmas Eve. Patricia's quiet mansion turned into a hub of excitement and gratitude. Every knock at her door brought new faces, neighbors she hadn't seen in years, strangers offering to help, and children bringing homemade ornaments. For the first time in years, Patricia didn't feel invisible. She realized that while her own family had shut her out, the world still had space for her love. As she looked at the growing pile of gifts under her tree, she whispered, "Daniel, you may not want me this Christmas, but look how many others do." Her eyes sparkled with peace. This Christmas she wouldn't be forgotten. She'd be the reason others remembered what love felt like. She heard the distant crunch of tires on the snowy driveway. A sleek black SUV pulled up slowly, its headlights cutting through the falling snow. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Daniel step out, his coat dusted white, holding a small wrapped gift in his hands. For a moment, Patricia froze. Part of her wanted to rush forward, while another part remembered the sting of his rejection. Daniel looked unsure, almost nervous, as he approached the door. The sound of laughter from inside drifted out, and he paused, confused by the crowd he hadn't expected to see. "Mum?" he called softly. Patricia straightened her posture, her face calm but unreadable. When he stepped inside, he was taken aback. The mansion, which he once called too big and lonely, was now filled with people singing, eating, and celebrating. Children were sitting around the tree opening gifts, and a group of volunteers was playing cards near the fire. What is all this?" he asked quietly. Patricia smiled faintly. "It's Christmas, Daniel. Everyone deserves one." Daniel glanced around, realizing the truth. His mother had created the kind of joy his own home lacked. He felt small, guilty even, remembering how he'd left her out. "Mum, I didn't know you were doing this," he said. Patricia nodded, replying simply, "You didn't ask." For the first time in years, Daniel had no words. He stood there, surrounded by the proof of her strength, realizing what he had lost by shutting her out. As the choir began another carol, Patricia invited Daniel into the living room. The guests, sensing something personal unfolding, stepped aside respectfully. Daniel stared at the grand tree, its lights twinkling gently, and said in a low voice, "Mum, I didn't mean to hurt you, it's just Claire felt uncomfortable. She thinks you judge her for not being as traditional." Patricia listened quietly, her expression soft but firm. "Daniel," she said slowly, "I don't judge anyone, but I won't apologize for the values that built this family." Her words landed heavily. Daniel looked down, guilt written all over his face. "I just wanted peace at home," he murmured. Patricia shook her head gently. "Peace doesn't come from avoiding love, Daniel. It comes from respecting it." The room fell silent, except for the crackling fireplace. Patricia continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I worked my whole life so you could have choices I never had. I never asked for much, just a chair at your table. But tonight, I realized something. Maybe I don't need an invitation to feel loved. Maybe love was meant to be shared, not begged for." Daniel's eyes glistened as he whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." Patricia reached out, touching his cheek softly. "I know you are, and that's enough." In that quiet moment, surrounded by people who had come seeking connection, the distance between them began to fade. Daniel stayed for the rest of the evening, sitting beside Patricia as guests continued to celebrate. He watched her interact with everyone, the way she made each person feel seen and valued. He realized how much of that kindness he had taken for granted growing up. When it was time for the choir's final song, Patricia stood at the center of the room, thanking everyone for coming. Before she could finish, Daniel stepped forward, his voice trembling. "I owe everyone here an apology," he said, glancing at his mother. "Especially her. I forgot what Christmas really means. It's not about comfort or control. It's about love, forgiveness, and being there for each other." The guests grew quiet, moved by his honesty. He turned to Patricia, his eyes filled with tears. "Mum, I was wrong. You didn't lose a family. I did. If you'll have me, I'd like to spend Christmas here. Not just this year, but every year." Patricia's lips quivered, but she smiled through her tears. "Of course, Daniel. Home is always open to those who find their way back." The room erupted in gentle applause. People wiped their eyes as they watched the two embrace under the golden glow of the Christmas tree. It wasn't just reconciliation between a mother and her son. It was a reminder to everyone in the room that love, no matter how bruised, always has a way of healing. As midnight approached, the guests began to leave one by one, each thanking Patricia for giving them a Christmas they would never forget. Children hugged her tightly, promising to visit again, while couples offered to help with next year's celebration. Daniel stayed behind, helping her clean up the dishes, his earlier arrogance replaced with quiet gratitude. The fire burned low, casting a warm light across the room. Patricia poured herself a cup of tea and sat down, looking around at the now empty hall that still echoed with laughter. Daniel joined her on the couch, holding her hand gently. "Mom," he said softly, "I didn't realize how much you were hurting." Patricia smiled faintly. "Sometimes, Daniel, people hide their pain behind strength, but love has a way of revealing what words can't." They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the wind outside. Finally, Patricia spoke again, her voice calm and full of peace. "I used to think family meant the people you're born to. But tonight, I learned family is everyone who shows up when you need love the most." Daniel nodded. Tears in his eyes, he leaned over and kissed her forehead. A small gesture, but one that carried years of regret and healing. As the clock struck midnight, Patricia looked out the window and whispered, "Thomas, our home is full again." The camera of the story would slowly pan out, showing her mansion glowing against the snowy night. No longer a symbol of loneliness, but of belonging. Her final reflection lingered like a soft echo. Never beg for love, create it, and let the world feel its warmth. Christmas Eve arrived with soft snowfall dusting the streets of Portland, and Patricia's mansion looked like a scene from a holiday postcard. Every window glowed with warm, golden light. Wreaths adorned the doors, and laughter could be heard from the driveway where cars lined up with guests arriving inside. The air was filled with the scent of roasted turkey, baked pies, and cinnamon cider. The large living room buzzed with life, children running around, adults chatting near the fireplace, and the local choir singing Silent Night. Beautifully in the background, Patricia moved gracefully among her guests, her face radiant with joy. For the first time in years, she felt complete. Strangers who had come alone were now sharing stories, hugging, and exchanging phone numbers like old friends. She watched a young single mother laugh with an elderly veteran over a plate of cookies, and her heart swelled. When she walked into the dining room, everyone rose instinctively to give her a round of applause. The long wooden table, decorated with candles and red ribbons, stretched across the room, filled with food contributed by nearly everyone present. Patricia lifted her glass and said softly, "To everyone who came tonight, you are proof that love never disappears. It only changes direction." A cheer followed, and she couldn't help but tear up. She could feel Thomas's spirit in the room, watching her with pride. As the night went on, music filled the air, and her once silent mansion became a place of belonging again. The loneliness she had carried for years had finally melted into warmth, laughter, and love. Just as Patricia stepped out onto the porch to catch her breath,